This is Surviving and Thriving, the Breaking Badass podcast, where we talk about all things from dating after divorce, healing from abuse, childhood trauma, and so much more. I'm your host, Bridget. Thanks for joining me. Welcome back to another episode of Surviving and Thriving, the Breaking Badass podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Bridget, and today is the last episode of our first season together of my inaugural season of me deciding I was finally going to start a podcast with all of you listening along. So thank you for joining me on this adventure. To finish out this season, I've got to start a disclaimer for you on this episode today. Today, our episode contains discussions of adult themes, including topics of physical and sexual violence. These themes may be triggering for some listeners today, and I advise for listener discretion, especially for those who may find some content distressing. If you or someone that you may know is experiencing domestic violence, I strongly encourage you to reach out for help, contacting local law enforcement for immediate assistance. Additionally, consider reaching out to support systems such as contacting a domestic violence hotline, shelters, or seeking counseling services. Remember, you are not alone, and there are people and resources that are ready to support you, including myself. Please take care while listening to this episode today, and feel free to pause or skip the episode if you need to. The most important thing is to take care of yourself. Now, without further ado, let's get started. This week, I actually got my domestic violence protective order renewed, and I am a resident of North Carolina in the United States, as I have so many of you that listen all over this world, and I am, well, first of all, very humbled. So every 2 years, I have gone to renew my domestic violence protective order, also known as a restraining order. And when it was granted to me this week, it was a big sigh of relief for one, but the anxiety just kind of left my body, and I had tears just flow out of my eyes in the courtroom. My abuser was not present, but it was a relief because I did not start out with it being what seemed to be very easy this week to get it renewed. I guess there's no better way to start this story than by starting from the beginning of how long it actually took me to get to this point, to even filing for a protective order in the first place. So let's go back. Back when I was just in a dating relationship with my abuser, before I was ever his wife, I found myself trying to piece together, actually, when I was putting together the timeline of this domestic violence restraining order, the first time I filed, of exactly what had happened to me when I was just his girlfriend. And I had a hard time recalling the information. Largely, this is because of cognitive dissonance and a phenomenon that happens from many years of gaslighting and trauma. But the thing is that abuse doesn't happen quickly. It's not just one moment. It's multiple moments that happen over the course of time. And it kind of just creeps up on you. And then all of a sudden, you don't really know what's happening until you know what's happening. It was the multiple comparisons to an ex-girlfriend, being told I wasn't good enough, It was the passive comments and insults, comments on my weight, the comments of how I didn't do my makeup a certain way. I didn't look pretty enough. Comments that I was being told that were shared by his family and his mother, that I dressed like a prostitute. Comments of how I was probably a bad mother because I was already a single mother of 2 young girls. It was these comments that had me in a position where I felt like I had to prove myself worthy, that I was good enough and deserving enough of this man's love and attention and affection, you see. That's the psychological and emotional part of this abuse. And it starts very slowly. Of course, at the beginning, everything's great. Everything is, he's so charming and literally seemed like Prince Charming. I remember I made a photo album. I gave it to him. Pictures that we had taken at the very beginning of our dating relationship. And I had said how I felt he was my savior and he had swept me off my feet. Literally felt like he was my very own Prince Charming. You see, that's the way all of these stories go at the very beginning. What I've learned is that if it seems too good to be true and it moves fast, you need to pay attention more quickly and more closely. It was hard to pay attention. I didn't know what I was paying attention to. I remember he broke up with me, my abuser, several times during the dating relationship, and I felt devastated. And then he would come back, and he would ask me to forgive him, that he had made a terrible mistake. He didn't know what he was doing, you see. And I naively forgave him. And this honeymoon stage started all over again. In actuality, it wasn't the honeymoon stage, it was the love bombing again. But I did not know any better. Shortly after that, I had discovered things that he would intentionally leave open on his phone and leave it out for me to see. Messages to the ex-girlfriend who lived in another country, with whom I was always compared. And that hurt. It felt like 1,000 knives stabbing me all at the same time. And I felt like I was hitting rock bottom. I hadn't felt that way in quite some time. That this person that I felt like I loved so deeply, so intensely, could cause me this amount of pain. He immediately accused me of invading his privacy. How dare I, that they were just friends. And then he reminded me of how much she had broken his heart, and he was just trying to close a chapter. I again then forgave him. But shortly thereafter, it was the multiple female friends. I was compared to them, and I would find the messages and communications of how he would talk to them, and then it was the late night calls of how he had not yet believed that he had found the love of his life. All the while, he had proposed to me, and I was his fiancée. A whirlwind relationship, one would say. He had proposed to me about within a year, just under a year of us dating. It was fast, but I thought I was madly in love. I had been madly love-bombed. That was in April. He picked the day we would get married. He picked the date, and it was very specific, and I did not understand it at the time. It would be a significant amount of time later, a few years later, that I figured it out. And the one thing I've learned since is that individuals who tend to be narcissistic or sociopathic tend to have some kind of connection with numbers, and they use numbers to, in some way, send some kind of message to exes. My father did this and he was narcissistic, and I've talked about him before. But so did my ex, my abuser. And well, our wedding anniversary became a continuation of what was his former dating anniversary with the ex-girlfriend with whom I was compared for the duration of our 10-year relationship. It's pretty fucked up, right? The wedding was small. It came and went quickly. And I remember he ridiculed me on what was our very quick and short-lived spontaneous type of honeymoon. It was just a quick trip to the beach for the weekend because I did not want to drink on the beach. There was a huge sign that said no alcohol there, and there were 2 police officers standing right there on the entrance of the beach, and I did not want to get in trouble because I work in the legal field. And I was made fun of and bullied by my then husband. Oh, those were the days. 2 weeks after our wedding, I came across a message that he had sent to that ex that I was compared to for 10 years. My life forever changed because I realized he would never change. But I still convinced myself for years that he would maybe get better. And I stayed. But that message was to the ex and said to her that as he turns the light off at night and as he kissed me, he would close his eyes and picture that it was her and that he loved her and would always love her. And my heart broke into a fucking million pieces. I didn't know what to do. But even then, I stayed. I think one of the reasons why I stayed was because I had been married before. And my first husband was very abusive to me. And I had 2 little girls. And I was so ashamed and embarrassed. I did not want to look like a failure yet again. So I stayed. Maybe I should have left then. Or maybe I should have left the time that I had caught yet another message of him with his ex. And I called his mother and his sister. We lived in a smaller townhome at the time. And I called them on the phone, devastated, and I just wanted help. I had what I thought was a fairly good relationship with these women. And I went and I closed myself in the laundry room and I sat on the floor with my back up against the door. He ended up getting in and grabbed me by my hair, pulled me out of the laundry room, and dragged me by my hair down the hallway. He yanked out my earring in the process, and I'm on the phone the whole while with his mom and his sister until he proceeded to rip the phone out of my hands and hang it up, told me never to contact his family again and to involve them in our problems, or anyone else for that matter, and then threw my head to the ground. Maybe I should have left then, but I stayed. I didn't call the police. I didn't call his mom back or his sister. And I didn't call the police because I was afraid of getting him in trouble after he hurt me. Maybe I should have called the police after he forced me to have sex with him, telling me that I was a whore and I was a prostitute. And after all I had put out to many men before him, what was the difference? I'll never forget the time that he had come home drunk. We had been married for years. By this time, we had had a little boy. And he pulled me out of our bed. He seemed to like to pull me by my hair. And then he dragged me by my arm from our bed because our son was sleeping in the bed and dragged me out by the hallway. And he was clearly intoxicated. He was eating an Oreo cookie and he had the crumbs of the cookie getting all over me. And he forced me to give him oral sex. And I was crying and I was begging him to leave me alone, that I just wanted to sleep. Maybe then I should have called the police or left. But I stayed. I was afraid of getting him in trouble. Maybe then I should have filed for a protective order. But the thought that I had in my head was, who in the world would believe that my husband was raping me? Who in the world would believe that my husband was sexually assaulting me? After he forced me to have perform oral sex on him rather, he forced himself on me. This was a pretty common occurrence in our marriage. But again, what was I to do? Who was I going to report this to? Who was going to believe that a husband was raping his wife? After he was done to me, he would kind of toss me to the side of the bed. And I would just lay there on my side and I would cry silently until I fell asleep. I learned to give in. I learned to just give him what he wanted because it was easier than saying no. It was easier than resisting and fighting. At one point, I had a conversation with my then sister-in-law and even my mother-in-law because he had cheated on me. He had sex with a prostitute, and I found out. After what he had done to me even. And they told me that it was my fault. They said that they would talk to him. But it was my poor attitude that had led him to do that. Can you believe that? So, they said that it's best that a woman give to their husband in the evening intimacy and meet the man's needs. That's what they told me. They were conditioning me to be this submissive woman, to only fulfill the man's needs. But what about mine? I think back and I remember that all I wanted was just to have a normal marriage, a happy home. I did a lot of covering up things back then. I wasn't really able to wear makeup or a dress, skirts, because I would be immediately accused of having an affair, sleeping with any man that I worked with. I'm a paralegal. I work with male attorneys at law firms. I couldn't even leave the building with a man because I would be immediately accused of sleeping with them. I could have left then, but I stayed, and I still tried to make him happy. I could have called the police the time that he hit me in my face. It was nearly him punching me in the nose while he was holding our infant son, and blood came gushing out of my nose. And he did it in front of my 2 little girls as they were watching SpongeBob. I will never, ever forget. And he said to my daughters, "Your mom is fucking cheating on me. She's fucking cheating on me." None of it was true. He was paranoid as hell because of a text message I had sent him saying I was going to the DMV, and I was there at my lunch updating my address because we had just moved and we had bought a house. I don't know if he broke my nose, but I know it was very bruised and swollen. And while holding our infant, blood came gushing out everywhere. And my daughter started screaming, and they saw all of it. I ran off to the bathroom to try to get some tissue and stuff it in my nose and stop the bleeding. And I grabbed my daughters and I left the house. He would not give me our son. I didn't call the police because I was afraid of getting him in trouble yet again. I called his sister And she, with his dad, were going to go to the house to calm him down. He wouldn't give me my baby. I was terrified of what he would do to him. And he had threatened if I had done anything stupid, I wouldn't see my son again. Instead, I took my daughters to McDonald's and I got them an ice cream sundae. And the woman at the window, because I went through the drive-thru, saw me and had seen the condition of my face and asked me if I was okay and if I needed help. And then I had the opportunity to tell her to get help, but I insisted I was fine. I could have done something then, but I didn't. There's moments where even my sons, who are very small when I was still married to their father, have told me stories of how they remember their father finding us at one point where I had left to escape his rage, and he found us at a hotel room and grabbed my head and bashed it up against a wall in the hotel room. I don't recall that. I could have called the police then. Statistics say that on average, it takes a woman who's a victim of domestic violence 7 times to leave. You leave 7 times before you leave for good. I left at least that many times before I finally left for good. Towards the end, his behavior was much worse, and I did start to call the police. And then I was tortured in my own home. And I started to see that the police weren't really helping me. He said that I would have to leave. He would blast music until 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, be intoxicated, and wake my children. And even then, the police would say there was nothing they could do, that I would have to leave. So that's when I started planning. I started to plan my fucking escape from this terrible monster of a human, because someone that behaves that way and has done that to their children clearly doesn't care about their children. And I could see how tired they were. I could see that my children were scared of this person. My children saved me. My children saved me from him. It's because of them that I left. It's because of them that I broke free. It's because of them that I planned to have a life of peace. My daughters told me repeatedly to leave, that he was never going to change. And they were very right. They saw it before I understood it. It's not easy. And it wasn't easy for me. I mean, I was followed in cars multiple times. I was chased in cars multiple times, trying to get me off of the roadway. I mean, it wasn't until after I was divorced that my domestic violence advocate told me, Bridget, you need a restraining order against this man. He is never going to stop. So I had to go through all of that hell, then leave, have my separation, go through post-separation abuse, which I still go through to a large degree. And then I still didn't understand that he wasn't going to ever stop. I filed for a restraining order. And check this out. I filed for the restraining order and I wasn't granted immediately a protective order. I was granted a hearing, and this was during COVID. The very next morning, after my ex was served with my protective order, he went and filed a retaliatory one with false allegations against me. And he was granted his ex parte. I was devastated. He abused me for over 10 years. Then he lies, misleads law enforcement, court officials. And not only that was he granted this protective order with bogus allegations, but he added our sons to the protective order. And he was able to take them from me for close to 3 weeks. It was the longest 3 fucking weeks of my life. Needless to say, in the end, after going through the trial of that, which took about 8 months, because there was lots of continuances, the judge granted mutual retaliatory restraining orders. So he had his, and I had mine. And what happens is these judges don't understand it. They see both parties as the problem and are like, and they don't have the time nor the patience. And they essentially are saying, both of you all stay away from each other. I never had a problem with him. I didn't want anything to do with him or his life or his family. I had them all blocked. I wanted them away from me. I wanted nothing to do with them. I had to co-parent with my abuser. That is challenging in and of itself. And I don't wish that upon anybody. But after a year, he didn't get his renewed. And I did. And it was renewed for another 2 years. And I just got it renewed again for another 2. So that's totaling, in the end, it'll be total for 6 years. And I'll get it renewed again and again. I don't have to prove that there's any new acts of domestic abuse. And for as unjust as the system is, I feel like finally I did get some justice. It took me a long time. It took me years, more than 10 years of abuse, more than probably 4 or 5 years of being separated to finally understand things and to get me to that point. All right, to give you some statistics, because you know that that's what I enjoy doing and I love giving you data, raw data. Mutual retaliatory restraining orders in the United States, where both parties file against each other, are granted in approximately 10 to 15% of domestic violence cases. However, I think it's important that we note that mutual orders are sometimes seen as controversial. Okay, obviously they are, because they're used by abusers to further manipulate and control the victim. Right? This is where DARVO comes into play, which is deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender role. The orders may reflect a misunderstanding of the dynamics of domestic violence, where one party may be the primary aggressor and the other is simply defending themselves. That's not typically the case where I have seen in mutual retaliatory restraining orders being granted. I have seen them a lot of times with false allegations. So the victim has filed first, and then the aggressor is filing second in retaliation of. Now, to share with you statistics on leaving domestic violence relationships. As I said before, on average, it takes a woman 7 attempts to leave a domestic violence relationship before she leaves for good. I will say, multiple efforts of me trying to leave before, I would leave with the help of my abuser's mother. And she would often offer me to go and stay at her home, only to push me right back to my abuser. That was not helpful. All right, this cycle is often due to a combination of fear, financial dependency. At one point, I had an apartment, but I was not getting any financial support. I had to go back and plan again. Emotional attachment, because you're trauma bonded, and the hope that the abuser will change. They might offer to go to therapy. If you're religious, oh, let's go to church. I'm going to change. I'm not going to do that anymore. All of the things. False promises. So understanding this overall statistic is crucial for offering support to people that you may know, or even to give yourself grace if you've experienced this. And it's helpful to give resources to individuals who have been in abusive relationships, not to get discouraged with them if they're going back. It also highlights the complexity and challenges that's involved in breaking free from the cycle of abuse. This is so very important, and it's largely misunderstood. There's a huge underreporting of marital rape. I talked about this in this episode. Marital rape remains one of the most underreported forms of sexual assault. Statistics suggest that nearly 10 to 14% of married women experience rape by their husbands, but the vast majority do not report it. The reasons for this are often rooted in fear of not being believed, societal stigma, and the complex dynamics of power and control within the marriage. Many victims also fear retaliation of further violence if they report the abuse. This underreporting contributes to the ongoing invisibility of marital rape as a serious and pervasive issue. Thank you for joining me on this deeply personal and challenging journey today. I know the topics that we've covered are heavy and may have stirred up a lot of emotions, both for myself and for many of you listening. If you find yourself in need of help or support after hearing today's episode, please don't hesitate to reach out to the resources listed in the show notes. Remember, you are not alone in this. There are people and organizations out there ready to support you. I want to express my deepest gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to listen to this episode. It's not easy for me to share these stories, and I know it's not easy for others either. But listening, we're all helping each other. By listening, you're helping to break the silence that so often surrounds these issues, and you're playing a vital role in bringing awareness and understanding to the struggles that many women face. These stories matters, and your support means the world to not only myself, but to those who are still finding the courage to speak out. As we wrap up this season, I encourage you to stay connected and follow along as we prepare for season 2. We'll be back soon with more insights, stories, and support to continue this important conversation. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for being here today and for this season. Your willingness to listen and engage is a powerful step towards change. Thank you again. Take care of yourselves, and I look forward to reconnecting with you in the next season. This is Bridget signing off for season 1 of Surviving and Thriving, the Breaking Badass podcast. Love and light. Until season 2. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Surviving and Thriving. If you found this discussion helpful, please follow and subscribe to our podcast for more stories of resilience and strength. Make sure that you share this episode with anyone who might benefit from it, and join in on our community of survivors supporting each other. And until next time, stay strong, keep on thriving.